If you have not yet read Don Quixote by Cervantes, you must. It is very well deserving of its place as the greatest novel ever written. Very briefly, this is partly autobiographical and part fantasy mixed together in the most amazing way. I'm going to read selections that will allow this book to review itself. It should be known, however, if you've not read this or you don't know yet, that the first half of this was written in the early 16th century, and in the intervening years that the public, it quickly became famous, that the public was waiting for the second volume. A second volume was purportedly written by someone else and passed around as the sequel. And so when Cervantes actually wrote the actual sequel, he made fun of the phony version of it and criticizes it in the second volume. I think that's about all we need to know ahead of time. Let's begin. We'll start with the prologue. Idle reader, you need no oath of mine to convince you that I wish this book, the child of my brain, were the handsomest, the liveliest, and the wisest that could be conceived, but I could not violate nature's ordinance whereby like engenders like. And so what could my sterile and uncouth genius beget but the tale of a dry, shriveled, whimsical offspring, full of odd fancies, such as never entered another's brain, just what might be begotten in a prison, where every discomfort is lodged and every dismal noise has its dwelling. At a village of La Mancha, whose name I do not wish to remember, there lived a little while ago one of those gentlemen who are wont to keep a lance in the rack, an old buckler, a lean horse, and a swift greyhound. Our gentleman was about 50 years of age, of a sturdy constitution, but wizened and gaunt-featured, an early riser and a devotee of the chase. You must know that the above-mentioned gentleman, in his leisure moments, which was most of the year, gave himself up with so much delight and gusto to reading books of chivalry that he almost entirely neglected the exercise of the chase and even the management of his domestic affairs. Indeed, his craze for this kind of literature became so extravagant that he sold many acres of arable land to purchase books of knight-errantry, and he carried off to his house as many as he could possibly find. In short, he so immersed himself in those romances that he spent whole days and nights over his books, and thus, with little sleeping and much reading, his brains dried up to such a degree that he lost the use of his reason. His imagination became filled with a host of fancies he had read in his books: enchantments, quarrels, battles, challenges, wounds, courtships, loves, tortures, and many other absurdities. So true did all this phantasmagoria from books appear to him that in his mind he accounted no history in the world more authentic. He believed that it was necessary, both for his own honor and for service of the state, that he should become a knight-errant, roaming through the world with his horse and armor in quest of adventures, and practicing all that had been performed by the knights-errant of whom he had read. That Cervantes has been a great friend of mine for many years, and I know him to be more versed in sorrows than in his song. His book has some bright ideas. It sets out to do something, but concludes nothing. We must wait for the second part, he promises, and perhaps, with amendment, he will attain the full measure of grace now denied. Meanwhile, until this be decided, keep him as a recluse in your lodging. Those adventures that we are after will bring us in the end so many misadventures that we won't know our right foot from our left. The best and wisest thing for us to do, in my humble opinion, is to go back to our village, now that it's reaping time, and look after our own affairs, and not go wandering from pillar to post and going from Kika to Mecca, as the saying goes. You may say that he is the famous Don Quixote of La Mancha, otherwise called the Knight of the Rueful Figure. I'll do my best to tell you a story, and if I manage to tell it and not be interrupted, you'll find it the best story in the world. So pay attention, sir, I'm going to begin. There was what there was. May the good that's coming be for all, and the harm for him who goes looking for it. And take note, your worship, master mine, that the beginning that the old folks put to their tales was not just as they pleased, but was a sentence of Cato, the Roman incensor, that says, evil to him who goes looking for it. That fits us now like a ring on a finger, meaning that your worship should stay mum and not go searching for trouble anywhere, but for us to go back by another road, since nobody forces us to follow this one, where so many fearful things are keeping us in a continual dither. I would have you know, friend, that I was born in this age of iron to revive in it the golden age. I am he for whom are reserved all great perils and valorous feats. She will gaze into the knight's eyes, and he into hers, and each will appear to the other somewhat more divine than human, and without knowing the why or the wherefore, they will be imprisoned and entangled in the inextricable net of love, experiencing great anguish in their hearts, for they know not how they should speak in order to reveal their feelings and desires. For bad luck always pursues genius. All or most of the knights-errant in the olden days were great troubadours and great musicians too, for these two accomplishments, or graces, as I would rather call them, are connected with lovers-errant, though it is true that the verses of the knights of old have more spirit than elegance. This denial added flame to flame and love to love, for though they imposed silence on our tongues, they could not impose it on our pens, which usually reveal more freely than do tongues the secrets of the heart, since many a time the mere presence of the beloved one disturbs and silences the staunchest heart and boldest tongue. I come from my vineyards. I know nothing. I'm not one to go pimping and prying into other people's lives. Who buys and lies, his purse will rue the price. What's more, naked I was born, and naked am I now. I neither lose nor win. You must know, Sancho, that the famous Amadis of Gaul was one of the most perfect of all knights-errant. I was wrong to say one. He was alone, the first, the unique, the lord of all who in his age were in the world. A fig for Don Belianis, and for all who said they equaled him in anything. I swear they are mistaken. Moreover, I say that when any painter wishes to win renown in his art, he endeavors to copy the originals of the most illustrious painters he knows, and this rule holds good for all the crafts and callings of any importance that serve to adorn the Republic. And so what he who would win the name of a prudent and patient must do, and does, is to imitate Ulysses, in whose person and labors Homer depicts for us a lively picture of a patient and long-suffering man, just as Virgil shows in the person of Aeneas the virtue of a dutiful son and the wisdom of a brave and expert captain. They do not portray them or describe them as they were, but as they should have been, to give example by their virtues to the men to come after them. In this way, Amadis was the North Star, the morning star, the son of all valiant knights and lovers, and all of us who fight under the banner of love and chivalry ought to imitate his example. This being the case, Sancho, my friend, I consider that the knight-errant who copies him most nearly will come nearest to attaining the perfection of chivalry. Is it possible that in the time you have been with me you have not yet found out that all the adventures of a knight-errant appear to be illusion, follies, and dreams, and turn out to be the reverse? Why, I have yet to tear my garments, scatter my armor about, and bang my head against these rocks, and other similar things that will amaze you. For what I want of Dulcinea of El Toboso, she is as good as the greatest princess in the land. And it is not true that all those poets who praise ladies under names they choose so freely really have them as mistresses. Do you think that the Amaryllises, the Phyllises, the Sylvias, the Dianas, the Galatias, and all the rest of which the books, the ballads, the barber shops, the comic theaters are full, were genuinely ladies of flesh and blood and the mistresses of those who celebrated their charms? Certainly not. Most of them were invented to serve as subjects for verses and to enable the poets to prove themselves lovers or capable of being such. I believe that everything is as I see it, neither more nor less, and in my imagination I portray her as I wish her to be, both in beauty and in quality. "Why, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "you evidently are no saner than I am." Who can cure my distress? Madness. Who can love's freedom e'er arrange? Change. Who my forlorn hopes bettereth? Death. If this is so, what waste of breath to try to banish all my woes, for there are no cures for love's throes but madness, change, and death. I was full of vague apprehensions and a sad foreboding that my desires would never be accomplished. Most happy and fortunate was the age in which the bravest of knights, Don Quixote of La Mancha, was launched into the world, since through his noble determination to revive and restore to the world the lost and almost defunct order of knight-errantry, we may enjoy today, in an age devoid of cheerful entertainment, not only the delights of his own truthful history, but also the tales and episodes it contains. Said the curate, "But is it not strange to see how readily this unfortunate gentleman believes all these lying fictions merely because they resemble the style and manner of his foolish books?" "It is," said Cardenio, "and so strange and unusual that I don't know whether anyone who tried to invent such a character in fiction would have the genius to achieve success." "There is another strange thing about it," said the curate. "If when you converse with this worthy gentleman you discuss other topics that have no bearing upon his madness, he speaks very reasonably and shows that he possesses a clear head and calm understanding. Indeed, provided one does not broach the subject of his chivalries, he could be considered a man of very sound judgment." Those who had listened to him felt sorry that a man who seemed to possess so good an understanding and such power of reason should lose them so entirely when dealing with his sinister and accursed chivalry. Perhaps the chivalries and enchantments of our day follow a different road from that followed by the ancients. For virtue is more persecuted by the wicked than it is cherished by the good. "The knight Don Quixote of La Mancha speaks the truth," said the curate at this juncture, "for he is traveling in this cart under a spell, not through his own faults and mistakes, but owing to the malignity of those who hate virtue and frown on heroism. This, sir, is the knight of the rueful figure, for you already must have heard men speak of him. His valorous exploits and mighty deeds will be engraved on lasting brass and everlasting marble, no matter how unwearying be the attempts of malice and envy to dim and obscure them. Works of fiction must match the understanding of those who read them, and they must be written in such a way that, by toning down the impossibilities, moderating the excesses, and keeping their readers in suspense, they may astonish, stimulate, and entertain, so that admiration and pleasure go hand in hand. But no writer will achieve this who shuns verisimilitude and imitation of nature, in which lie the highest qualities of literature." And if all this is done in a pleasant style with an ingenious plot, keeping as near as possible to the truth, the author will, without doubt, weave a web of such variegated and beautiful threads that, when finished, it will show such beauty and perfection that it will achieve the end that is the aim of all those works, which is, as I have said, to instruct as well as to entertain. I, for one, have been tempted to write a book of chivalry, observing all the points I mentioned, and to tell you the truth, I've written more than 100 sheets to ascertain whether they come up to my opinion of them. I have shown them to learned and judicious men very fond of that kind of reading, as well as to others who are ignorant and only wish to be entertained by listening to absurdities, and from all of them I met with flattering approval. Nevertheless, I have proceeded no further, not only because I considered it a task unbecoming my profession, but also because I found that the number of the ignorant exceeded that of the wise, and though it is better to be praised by the few wise and jeered at by the many fools, yet I do not want to subject myself to the muddled judgment of the capricious crowd, who are mostly given to reading such books. All this is prejudicial to the truth, detrimental to history, and puts our Spanish genius in a shameful light before the foreigners, who scrupulously observe the rules of the drama and look upon us as uncouth barbarians when they see the nonsense and absurdities of the plays we write. And it is not enough excuse to say that the chief reason why well-ordered states allow stage plays to be acted is to entertain the common people with an honest pastime that will divert the evil humors that idleness at times engenders, and that since any play can do that, whether it is good or bad, it is no use imposing laws or compelling playwrights and actors to write their plays as they should be written, because, as I've said, they can achieve their purpose with any kind of a play. To this I would reply that their purpose could be better achieved, beyond all comparison, by plays that are good than by those that are not so, because the public, after seeing a well-written and well-constructed play, would come away delighted by the comic part, instructed by the serious, intrigued by the plot, enlivened by the witty quips, warned by the tricks, edified by the moral, incensed against vice, and enamored of virtue. A good play will produce all those effects upon the mind of an audience, however obtuse and uncouth, and a play possessing all these qualities is bound to amuse and entertain, please and satisfy, than one that is devoid of them, as are most of those that nowadays are played. It is not the fault of the poets who write them, for some of them recognize where they go astray and know extremely well what they ought to do. But as plays have become a marketable commodity, they say, and say rightly, that the managers would not buy them if they were not of the usual kind. So, the poet tries to conform to what is required by the manager who pays him his salary. The truth of this may be proved by the infinite number of plays written by a most fortunate genius of this country, with so much splendor and so much charm, with such elegant verses, with such choice language, and finally with such eloquence and noble style that the world is full of his renown. And yet, because he is willing to suit the taste of the managers, not all his plays have reached, as some have, the requisite pitch of perfection. Others write their plays with so little heed of what they are doing that, after the show is over, the actors have to take to their heels and hide for fear of being punished, as they often have been, for acting scenes offensive to kings or libelous to some family. I advise you to behave like a man of sense. Read these books, and you will see what pleasure you get from them. He commends himself to God and his lady, and casts himself into the middle of the seething pool. There, when he least expects it, and when he knows not when it will end, he finds himself amid flowered meadows whose beauty far exceeds the Elysian fields. There, the sky seems to him more transparent, and the sun to shine with fresher radiance. Any passage from any story of knight-errantry is bound to rouse both wonder and delight in any reader, whoever he may be. Believe me then, good sir, and as I have told you before, read those books and you will see how they banish your melancholy and improve your temper, if perchance be bad. I declare that ever since I've become a knight-errant, I am valiant, courteous, liberal, well-bred, generous, polite, bold, gently patient, and an endurer of toils, imprisonments, and enchantments. I do not know what more could be said. I am guided by the example of the great Amadis of Gaul, who made his squire count of the Firm Isle. So I may make a count of Sancho Panza without my conscience pricking me, for he is one of the best squires a knight-errant ever had. The canon was astonished at the well-reasoned nonsense uttered by Don Quixote, if nonsense can ever be well-reasoned, at his description of the adventures of the Knight of the Lake. I will listen to you, my brother, most willingly, and all these gentlemen will do likewise, for they are men of good sense and fond of strange narratives that surprise, entertain, and charm the senses, as I am sure your story will do. So begin, friend, for we shall all listen. Who should it be but the famous Don Quixote of La Mancha, the redresser of injuries, the righter of wrongs, the protector of damsels, the terror of giants, and the winner of battles? That seems to me, answered the goatherd, like what we read in books about knights-errant, who did all the things you say this man does, though I take it that your worship is joking, or the gentleman must have a couple of rooms in his brain vacant. If fortune had not thrown in his path an aged physician who had in his possession a leaden box that he said he had discovered among the ruined foundations of an ancient hermitage that was being rebuilt. In this box he had found certain parchments written in the Gothic script, but in Castilian verse. Such as could be deciphered and interpreted, the trustworthy author of this original and matchless history has set down here, and he asks no recompense from his readers for the immense pains it has cost him to ransack all the archives of La Mancha to drag it into light. All he asks is that they should give it as much credit as sensible men are wont to give to the books of chivalry, which are held in such high esteem in the world. With this he will reckon himself well paid and satisfied, and he will be encouraged to go in search of other histories, perhaps less truthful than this one, but at least as inventive and entertaining. Here's tubby Sancho Panza, who is small, but yet, strange miracle, his valor's great. No simpler squire was ever known to all, nor one more guileless ever served a knight. Within an ace he came to being an earl, but this grim, churlish age conspired with fate to insult and belabor him, for an ass always gets kicks and buffets from a churl. An ass he rode, this I with shame must mention, our simple squire as he came trudging on behind mild Rosinante and his knight. How vain the fondest hopes of mankind seem, how tempting all their promises of rest, and yet they fade away in smoke and dream. Is it possible that your worship does not know that comparisons between wit and wit, valor and valor, beauty and beauty, birth and birth, are always hateful and cause resentment? I am not Neptune, the god of the waters, and I am not setting myself up as a wise man when I am not. I only strive to convince the world of its errors in not reviving that most fortunate age in which the order of chivalry flourished. But our depraved age does not deserve to enjoy so great a blessing as did those in which knights-errant undertook and burdened their shoulders with the defense of kingdoms, the protection of damsels, the relief of children and orphans, the chastisement of the proud, and the rewarding of the humble. Most of our knights nowadays prefer to nestle in the damasks, brocades, and other rich silks they wear than in armored coats of mail. There are now no knights who sleep in the fields, exposed to the rigor of the heavens in full armor from head to foot. There is no one now who snatches a nap, as they say, resting on his lance and with his feet on the stirrups as knights-errant did of old. There was no one now to sally forth from this wood and enter that mountain, and from there go to a wasted and deserted shore of the sea, most often stormy and tempestuous, and to find there on the beach a little boat, without oars, sail, mast, or tackle, and with undaunted heart to fling himself in and entrust himself to the implacable waves of the deep sea, which at one moment toss him up to the sky and at another engulf him in the abyss. Then, exposing his chest to the irresistible tempest, he finds himself, when he least expects it, more than 9,000 miles from the place where he embarked, and leaping onto a remote and unknown shore, he undergoes experiences worthy to be inscribed not on parchment, but on brass. Today, sloth triumphs over industry, idleness over labor, vice over virtue, arrogance over bravery, and theory over the practice of arms, which only lived and flourished in the golden age and among knights-errant. For it is right and natural for poets who have been scorned or not accepted by their ladies, either fictitious or modeled on those they have chosen as mistresses of their thoughts, to revenge themselves in satires and lampoons. Let us keep our eyes open and see what comes of this crazy alliance of knight and squire. Both of them seem to be cast in the same mold, and the master's eccentricities would not be worth a farthing without the squire's foolishness. You can speak freely, Sancho, without beating about the bush. Then the first thing I'll say is that the common people take your worship for a mighty great madman, and they think I'm no less of a simpleton. The gentry say that you're not content with being a country gentleman, and that you have turned yourself into a don, and cast yourself into knighthood with no more than a few miserable vine stalks and 2 acres of land, with a tatter behind and another in front to bless your name. The knights say they don't relish seeing the petty gentry setting themselves up against them, especially those squireens who black their shoes and darn their black stockings with green silk. Observe, Sancho, said Don Quixote, that whenever virtue is found in an eminent degree, it is persecuted. Few or none of the famous heroes of old have escaped being slandered by malicious tongues. One of the things, said Don Quixote, which shall give the greatest pleasure to a virtuous and eminent man is to see himself in his lifetime printed and in the press, and with a good name on people's tongues. A good name, I repeat, for were it the contrary, no death could be so bad. In my opinion, said Don Quixote, there is no human history in the world which has not its ups and downs, especially those that deal with knight-errantry. They can never be full of lucky incidents alone. For all that, replied the bachelor, some who have read your history say that they would have been glad if the author had omitted some of the countless drubbings that were given Don Quixote in his various encounters. Aha! There's where the truth of the story comes in, rejoined Sancho. Yet they might in all fairness have kept quiet about them, said Don Quixote, for there is no point in writing about actions that do not change or affect the truth of the story, if they intend to diminish the stature of the hero. Aeneas, I'm sure, was not as pious as Virgil made him out to be, nor Ulysses as prudent as he is described in Homer. May I be blowed, Sancho, if you're not the second person in the history. Why, there are some who prefer to hear you talk than the best parts in the whole book, though, to be sure, there are others who say you were much too credulous in taking as gospel truth that island Don Quixote has promised you. For it is so plain that there is nothing in it to cause any difficulty. Children finger it, young people read it, grown men know it by heart, and old men praise it. It is so thumbed and read and so familiar to all kinds of people that no sooner do they catch sight of a lean hack than they cry out, "There goes Rosinante." Those who are most given to reading it are pages, for there's no lord's antechamber in which you will not find a Don Quixote. When one lays it down, another picks it up. Some grab at it, others beg for it. This story, in fact, is the most delightful and least harmful entertainment ever seen to this day, for nowhere in it can one detect even the shadow of an indelicate expression or an uncatholic thought. To write in any other way, said Don Quixote, would be to write not truths but lies, and historians who resort to lying ought to be burned like coiners of false money. But I do not know what induced the author to make use of novels and irrelevant tales when he had so much to write of in mine. No doubt he felt bound by the proverb, "With straw or with hay, what odds we say." For really, if he had confined himself to my thoughts, my sighs, my tears, my righteous desires, and my enterprises, he could have compiled of all than all the works of El Tostado, or at least as big. So my conclusion is that one needs good judgment and ripe understanding to write histories or books of any sort whatsoever. To be witty and write humorously requires great genius. The most cunning part in a comedy is the clown's, for a man who wants to be taken for a simpleton must never be one. History is like a sacred text, for it has to be truthful, and where the truth is, there is God. But in spite of this, there are some who write books and toss them off into the world as though they were pancakes. "Does the author," asked Don Quixote, "by any chance promise a second part?" "Yes, he does," replied Sancho, "but he says he has not found it, nor does he know who has it, and so we are in doubt whether it will come out or not. And therefore, because some say, 'Never have second parts been any good,' and others, 'Enough has been written about Don Quixote,' it is doubtful whether there will be a sequel, though those who are rather of a jovial than of a saturnine temperament say, 'Let us have more Quixoteries. Let Don Quixote charge and Sancho talk, and come what may, we'll be content.' All are not courteous and well-mannered. Some are vain, swaggering rascals. Nor are all who call themselves gentlemen to be taken at their own valuation. For some are of gold, others are of base alloy, and all look like gentlemen, but not all are able to stand the touchstone of truth. There are low men who blow themselves up to bursting point to appear gentlemen, and others of exalted rank who seem to be dying to pass for men of the vulgar herd. The former rise through ambition or virtue, the latter sink through indolence or vice, and it is necessary to have knowledge and discernment in order to distinguish between these two kinds of gentlemen, so alike in name and so different in actions." Sancho concluded that his good fortune was to exceed and overtop that of his master, basing his arguments upon some kind of fortune-telling that he had learned goodness only knows where, for the history does not say. "If the history of my deeds, which they say is now in print, was written by some wise man who is an enemy of mine, I'm afraid he may have mingled 1,000 lies with one truth, and turned aside to relate idle tales that have nothing to do with the course of truthful history." "That is what I say too," answered Sancho, "and I suspect in that legend or history my reputation goes all topsy-turvy, jolting up and down, here and there, helter-skelter, sweeping the streets, as the saying goes. To tell you the truth, I am a bit roguish, and I've a streak of malice in me, but it is all covered by the broad cloak of my simplicity, which is always natural and never put on. The historians ought to have mercy and treat me well in their writings. Well, let them have their say, for naked I was born, naked I am. I neither lose nor win. And if I do find myself put into books and bandied about all over the world, I don't care a fig. Let them say what they like about me. Because it is so near at hand, and to save ourselves the trouble of undressing and dressing again, we go in the costumes in which we play. The ornaments of the drama should not be real, but only make-believe and fiction like the drama itself. For they are all productive of much good to the state, placing before us at every step a mirror in which we may see vividly portrayed the action of human life. Nothing, in fact, more truly portrays us as we are and as we would be than the play and the players. Now tell me, have you ever seen a play acted in which kings, emperors, pontiffs, knights, ladies, and diverse other characters are introduced? One plays the bully, another the rogue, this one the merchant, that the soldier, one the wise fool, another the foolish lover. When the play is over and they have divested themselves of the dresses they wore in it, the actors are all again upon the same level. "Yes, I've seen it," answered Sancho. "Well then," said Don Quixote, "the same happens in the comedy and life of this world, where some play emperors, others popes, and in short, all the parts that can be brought into a play. But when it is over, that is to say, when life ends, death strips them all of the robes that distinguished one from the other, and all are equal in the grave. Madness has always more followers and hangers-on than wisdom. Tell us now, who is the greater madman? He who is so because he cannot help it, or he who is so of his own free will? I am a knight, of those, as people say, who ride in quest of valiant enterprise. I have left my native country. I have pledged my estate. I have forsaken my comfort and delivered myself into the arms of fortune to lead where she will. I have sought to revive the now extinct order of knight-errantry, and for many a day, stumbling here, falling there, flung down in one place and rising up in another, I have been accomplishing a great part of my design, succoring widows, protecting maidens, and relieving wives, orphans, and young children, the proper and natural office of knights-errant. And so, by my many valiant and Christian deeds, I have been found worthy to appear in print in almost all, or at least most, of the nations of the earth. 30,000 volumes of my history have been printed, and it is on the way to be printed 30,000 times more if heaven does not prevent it. In fact, to sum up all in a few words, or in one word, I must tell you that I am Don Quixote of La Mancha, otherwise called the Knight of the Rueful Figure. And though to praise oneself is degrading, I am compelled at times to sound my own, though naturally only when there is no one present to sound them. Poetry, my dear sir, I would compare to a tender young and ravishingly beautiful maiden, whom many other maidens, namely all the other sciences, strive to enrich, to polish, and to adorn, and she has to exact service from all, and all of them can only become exalted through her. But this maiden refuses to be manhandled or dragged through the streets, or exposed to the public at the market corners or in the antechambers of palaces, for she is fashioned of an alchemy of such power that anyone who knows how to treat her will transmute her into purest gold of inestimable price. He who possesses her must keep her within bounds, not letting her descend to base lampoons or impious sonnets. She must not be displayed for sale, unless in heroic poems, in mournful tragedies, or in merry and artificial comedies. She must not suffer herself to be handled by buffoons, nor by the vulgar mob who are incapable of recognizing or valuing the treasures she enshrines. Do not imagine, sir, that by vulgar I mean only the common and humble people, for everyone who is ignorant, be he a prince or a lord, can and should be included in the category of the vulgar. So anyone with the qualifications I have mentioned who takes up and treats poetry will become famous, and his name will be held in esteem among all the civilized nations of the world. For art is not better than nature, but merely perfects her. So, nature combined with art and art with nature will produce a most perfect poet. The pen is the tongue of the soul, and the thoughts begotten there will burgeon in whatever he writes. For I know well what valor is, namely, a virtue that is situated between the two vicious extremes, which are cowardice and rashness. But it is far better for the brave man to mount to the height of rashness than to sink into the depths of cowardice. For just as it is easier for the generous than for the miser to be prodigal, so it is easier for the daring than for the cowardly to become truly valiant. Remember that love and war are the same thing, and since it is permissible in war to make use of stratagems to overcome the enemy, so in the contests of love the tricks and wiles employed to achieve the desired end are allowable, provided they do not bring injury or dishonor on the beloved one. Those two whom God hath joined together man cannot put asunder, and he who attempts it must first pass the point of this lance. Learn that you have here before you. Open your eyes and you will see him. That great knight about whom the magician Merlin has prophesied so many things, that Don Quixote of La Mancha, I say, who once again and to better purpose than in the past, has revived in the present the already forgotten order of knight-errantry. By his aid and favor, we may be disenchanted, for great deeds are reserved for great men. This is a point, said Sancho, where the proverb comes pat. Tell me the company you keep, and I'll tell you what you are. So if this adventure seems apocryphal, it is not I who am to blame, for I write it down without vouching its truth or falsity. You, cautious reader, as you are wise, must judge for yourself, for I cannot, and should not, do more. When a valiant man flees, it is obvious that there is foul play, and it is a wise man's duty to reserve himself for a better occasion. This boat, directly and without any possibility of there being an error, summons me to embark and travel in it, to succor some knight or other person of rank in distress who must certainly be in great peril. For such is the style of the books of chivalry, and such the practice of the enchanters who figure in them. When any knight is involved in any peril and can only be delivered by the hand of another knight, though they may be 6,000 or 9,000 miles apart, they either snatch him up on a cloud or provide him with a boat, in which he embarks, and in less than the twinkling of an eye they bear him either by air or by sea, wherever he pleases, and where his help is needed. The Duke and the Duchess had read the first part of this history, and were therefore well aware of Don Quixote's crazy humor, so they awaited his coming with the greatest eagerness. Is nothing else needed than to slip into other men's houses by hook or by crook and rule over the masters, and after having been reared in the straitened circumstances of some seminary, and without having ever seen more of the world than is contained within 20 or 30 leagues around, to proceed to lay down the law for chivalry and pass judgment on knights-errant? Is it a wonder that they are mad, when we see sane people sanctioning their madness? Many other times I have said it, and now I say it again. A knight-errant without a lady is like a tree without leaves, a house without foundations, and a shadow without the body by which it is caused. There is no more to be said, replied the Duchess. But yet if we are to give credit to the history of Don Quixote, which has lately been given to the world amidst the general applause of mankind, we gather from it, if I remember right, that your worship has never seen Lady Dulcinea, and that this lady does not exist on earth, but as a fantastical mistress, whom your worship has begotten and brought forth in your mind, and painted with all the graces and perfections you desired. The Panza, said Sancho before anyone else could reply, is here, and the Don Quixotissimo likewhisissimo. Therefore, dolefulest duenissima, You may say what you wishissimo, for we are all ready and preparedissimo to be your Cervantisimuses. The knight only went astray when he touched upon chivalry, but in every other topic he showed that he possessed a clear-sighted and unbiased mind, with the result that his actions belied his judgment, and his judgment his actions, at every step. For it seemed to him that he was always having to speak of the knight and Sancho without ever daring to indulge in digressions and episodes of a more serious and entertaining character. He noted that to have his mind and pen forever confined to a single subject and to have to speak through the mouths of a few characters only was intolerable and unprofitable drudgery to an author. To avoid this difficulty, he had in the first part resorted to the device of short tales like Ill-Advised Curiosity and The Captive's Story, which are, as it were, detached from the story, though the rest of the tales are incidents that happened to Don Quixote himself and could not be omitted. He also felt, as he says, that many readers, carried away by their interest in the knight's exploits, would be inclined to neglect these tales, passing over them either hastily or with boredom, thereby failing to notice their elegance and fine craftsmanship, which would have been clearly manifest if they had been published by themselves and not joined to Don Quixote's lunacy and Sancho's fooleries. And therefore in this second part he resolved not to insert any tales, either detached or interwoven with the narrative, but only some episodes like them, arising naturally out of the actual course of events, and even these should be used sparingly and with no more words than necessary to explain them. And seeing that he confines himself closely within the boundaries of the narrative, although he has the skill, the knowledge, and the capacity to deal with the whole universe for his theme, he asks that his pains be not undervalued, but that he be commended not for what he writes, but for what he has refrained from writing. Now, amiable reader, let the worthy Sancho depart in peace and in a happy hour. When we come to describe his conduct in office, you may well expect over 2 bushels of laughter, but for the moment let us hearken to what befell his master that night. And if this does not make you hold your sides laughing, at least you will grin like a monkey. For the noble knight's adventures are always bound to create either surprise or merriment. Do you see this gentleman who stands before us? Well, you must know that he is the most valiant, the most lovesick, and the most courteous knight in all the world, unless the history of his exploits, which I have read in print, lies and deceives us. Said Don Quixote, I will not set foot in Saragossa, and so the forgery of this new historian shall be exposed to the eyes of the world, and mankind will be convinced that I am not the Don Quixote of whom he speaks. He was afraid that its fame might reach the ears of those watchful sentinels of our faith. Books like this, numerous though they be, are the kind that ought to be printed, for there are many sinners nowadays, and infinite light is needed for so many in the dark. Works of invention are only good insofar as they touch the truth, or the semblance thereof, and true stories are better the more authentic they are. Illustrious knight and never enough renowned Don Quixote of La Mancha, I am the Knight of the White Moon, whose unheard-of exploits perchance may have reached your ears. O most renowned author, O fortunate Don Quixote, O famous Dulcinea, O droll Sancho Panza, may you jointly and singly live infinite ages, to the delight and general enjoyment of mankind.